Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is a continuous series to build Active Directory, a Tier 3 Active Directory certificates services on Windows Server 2025. In the previous videos, we configured and installed our Active Directory domain services, and we also prepared our web server to host our CDP and AIA information. In this video, we are going to configure our offline root CA. Remember, this is a test lab and I want you all to take note of that. There are some changes that I am going to configure based on my own likings. If you want to make any changes in your environment, or if you're building something for an organization, you want to consult with their security team before you go ahead and make the changes. Now, for this server, I'm going to log in with the local administrator account. Remember, this is not joined to our domain CAPolabs.net. So I'm going to log in with the local administrator account. Okay, so now before we install Active Directory Certificate services, we are going to create a file called CAPolicy.inf. Now, what this file allows us to do is to predefine some certain parameters, extensions, and some constraints of the CA before we actually install the CA. When you create this file and you install Active Directory Certificate services, it's going to read from that file some of the predefined parameters. When installing Active Directory Certificate services, you can define some parameters within the GUI interface, or if you're using a PowerShell to install that, you can define some of those parameters. But there are some parameters that you can't define. Like, for example, the most common one would be like the templates that the default templates that comes with Active Directory Certificate services. You can decide to say you don't want those default templates to be part of your CA when you build the CA. All right. So these are some parameters that we can predefine before we install Active Directory Certificate services. Another example of the parameters is the validity period of our CRL, which basically I'm going to show an example when we are configuring this. I'm going to predefine the validity period of our CRL to 2 years. So when we install Active Directory Certificate services, it's going to read from that file and then pre-configure the CRL expiration to 2 years. I'm using 2 years because this is my lab, and organizations for offline roots CAs will want them to publish their CRL for 1 year. That's what most organizations will do. So we are going to create the CAPolicy.inf file, and Microsoft recommends that we place that under the root Windows directory. So if I go to our C drive and then go to Windows, this is where Microsoft wants us to place this CAPolicy.inf. I'm going to view all extensions for every file, and we're going to create our .inf file. So I'm going to create a new txt file, and I'm going to name it CA policy, and the extension of it should be inf. So .inf. Make sure that this is spelled out correctly. CAPolicy.inf. If you make any mistake, Active Directory Certificate services will not be able to read from this file. So I'm going to double click on it and I already created my own INF file. I'm going to explain some of the stuff that I have created here in a moment. So I'm going to paste this here, and basically the renewal length of this CA, when this CA renews, is going to be 20. So the key length is going to be 2048, and then the validity period for this CA when it renews is going to be 20 years. That is 20 in units, and then the period itself is going to be in years. So basically, it's going to be 20 years, and then our CRL, the period is going to be 2 years, and then the unit is 2. So basically 2 years. So I'm predefining our CRL to last for 2 years. When we are configuring our intermediate CA, I will not be doing this. I'm going to be using the GUI to configure the CRL information. All right, and for Delta CRLs, we have that marked to 0. So basically, what we are saying is we don't want to issue Delta CRLs. That's what this means. And most root CAs don't issue Delta CRLs. I don't want to say root CAs don't issue Delta CRLs, but it's recommended they don't issue Delta CRLs because they are always offline. We'll talk about the differences between a base CRL and Delta CRL when we get to that session. Okay, so I'm going to save this, and let me just double check, make sure it's properly saved. Okay, so we have CAPolicy.inf. Now we're going to install the Active Directory Certificate services on this machine. I just want you to know that I have renamed this machine to root CA. Okay, if you want, you can just leave it by the default name that it came with. Alright, so I'm going to add our Active Directory Certificate Services role, and we are going to select this first option, Active Directory Certificates Services, and then accept to add all the features that it needs for this installation. So I'm going to click on next, and then next, and then next, and the only role that we need to install is just certificate authority. So I'm going to click next and then click install. Okay, so our Active Directory Certificate Services installation is now complete. We are going to finish the configuration. So I'm going to click on configure Active Directory Certificate Services on this destination server, and I'm going to be using our local account, our local administrator account. And I'm going to click next, and I'm going to select certificate authority, and I'm going to click next, and the type of CA is going to be a standalone CA, and this is going to be offline. This enterprise CA is grayed out because this server is not joined to our domain. When we're configuring our issuing CA, we're going to have the option to choose between an enterprise CA and a standalone CA. And of course, we're going to choose the enterprise CA because that CA is going to be online and issuing certificates to our domain joined users and devices. So we're going to select standalone CA. Also, I just want to clarify that offline CAs can also be enterprise CAs if they're joined to a domain. You can have a root CA being an enterprise CA. Not recommended, but you can do it if you want. Now I'm going to click on next, and then our CA type is going to be root CA. Click on next, and then have it create the private key. And I'm going to leave everything here as default. If you want, you can change this to 4096, but I'm going to leave it as RSA 2048. Now the CA name, I'm going to name this Kipo Labs root the distinguished name. Here you can define your domain's distinguished name if you want, which is going to be DC equal to CAPolabs, and then DC equals to net, which is CAPolabs.net. Also, you can add some other parameters as well, which will appear within the certificate's subject distinguished name. Like you can add the name of your organization, you can add the state, you can add an email to this location as well. So for me, I can leave this as empty. However, I just want to add the name of my organization. This is a lab, so I'm going to do this for our roots. However, I will not be doing it for our enterprise issuing CA, so that we can compare and see some of the information that we can see in the subject DN of these CAs. Okay, so O, which is our organization, is equal to PKI Consulting. ST, which is our state, and I chose Texas. DC CAPolabs, and DC equal net. Okay, so I'm going to click next. Validity period, I will choose 20 years, and then click on next, and then I'm going to leave everything else as default and just configure this. Okay, so our configuration is successful. So I'm going to close this out, and now we can open our certificate authority. I'm going to pin this to my taskbar. Okay, now I want to verify that it reads from our CAPolicy.inf that we created. And one way I can validate this is by looking at the CRL validity period that we configured. So if I right click on this, go to all properties, there are two ways that we can take a look at it. We can just go to the default publication location where this CRL has been published by this CA, or I can just look it up from here. However, this is a learning process, and I want us to know where the CRL have been published by default. Okay, so usually by default the CRL are published for 1 week, but we configured our CAPolicy.inf to publish CRLs for 2 years. So we want to validate that. Now, before we do that, I just want to take a look at the certificate itself of this CA. So I'm going to view certificate. Okay, so our certificate is valid from 2025 to 2045, which is 20 years. And then one of the things that I'm interested in looking at is the subject. See, we have the common name, and then our organization, state, and then our domain. So because we added this information, that is why they appeared in the subject of this certificate. And the certificate path is just going to be the self-signed CA itself. So now if I go to the extension tab, and if you look at the first, under the CRL or CDP extension, we see the default place that the first CRL of the CA was published. And then if we navigate to this directory, we should see the very first CRL. Also, if I expand this and then right click on revoke certificates and then go to properties, I can take a look at the CRL publishing parameters. And if we see CRL publication interval is 2 years, right? And if we want, we can change this to 1 year if we want, but I'm leaving it as 2 years, which tells me that this CA actually read from our CAPolicy.inf. If there was any mistake in typing the name of the CAPolicy.inf, we will have seen 1 week validity period here, right? So we can also take a look at the CRL itself. We can view the CRL to see if there are any revoked certificates. So if you click on view CRLs, we will have the option to view the CRL information. Okay, so this is our very first CRL that was published by the CA. So I'm going to click view, and if we look at the next time this CRLs needs to be published is exactly 2 years from today when I created this CA. Okay, so now remember when we created when we built our web server, we created an alias pki.capolibs.net, and that is going to be the URL with some additional information where our CRL and AIA information will be accessible. That will be the CRL location for our roots, intermediate, and issuing CA. So we want to make sure that when this CA issues a new certificate, it should have that extension pki.capolibs.net in the certificate CRL or CDP extension and AIA extension as well. So we're going to configure that on this CA. So if I right click on the CA and then go to properties and then go to extension, I'm going to remove LDAP. I don't want, this is an offline root CA, so I don't want its CRL information to be published in LDAP. So I'm going to remove this and also remove this, and then I'm going to remove this as well. Initially I said there are two ways we could view the CRL information of this CA. We could have just gone to this directory and view the CRL. We're going to do that and copy some of the CRL information. So this directory, basically what it means is we're going to publish our CRL to that location. Basically that's what it means. We won't be publishing Delta CRL, so I'm going to uncheck this. All right, and then now we're going to add capolibs.net. You remember that's alias that we created. So I'm going to type it in here, pki.capolibs.net, and I'm just going to leave everything else and click OK. Alright, we won't be publishing Delta CRLs. I just noticed we made a mistake. So here Delta CRLs allowed. I'll remove it and add it one more time. Okay, so we're going to type pki.capolibs.net, and we're going to remove this definition. Okay, so basically that is all that we need. We don't want to publish Delta CRL, so I'm going to click OK, and then we're going to select these two options: include in the CDP extension of issued certificates, and then include in the IDP extension of issued certificates. Now if I click apply, this is going to force restart this certificate authority, but I want to do the configuration of our authority information access or our AIA information. I can just decide to remove all of this because I can get this certificate from here, but I'm going to remove the last three. And then we are going to add, I'm going to copy this. Okay, and make sure that I capture pki.capolibs.net, and I think I copied this as well, so I'm going to do that. Okay, so when someone goes to http capolibs CAPolicy.inf/set enroll. Take note of that, set enroll. When we were configuring our web server, the directory that we created, we named it set enroll. If you had a different name like CDP, you will have to change this name, and the same applies to the CDP extension as well. You see, after CAPolabs.net / we have set enroll. If you have a different name, you want to type it here. Okay, so for this, we want to include in the AIA extension of issued certificates. I'm going to click OK, and then now I am going to click apply, and then now it's going to restart our CA. That is it for configuring our CA. I intentionally didn't run some set util command. We will do that later on. Basically, what that set util command is going to do is it's going to tell this CA, when they issue a certificate, how long should that certificate be valid for, right? So by default, if we submit a CSR to this CA, it's going to issue the certificate to be valid for only 1 year. So we're going to test that out, and then we're going to run the set util command when issuing our intermediate CA. So I'll see you guys in the next session.